Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal here with Aaron Mate as usual. And sort of a makeup stream. I had to bounce after like an hour of the last stream, or maybe a little less, unexpectedly due to an emergency. I definitely wouldn't bolt from a stream under any circumstance unless it was serious, but I mean, this is live. You never know what's going to happen. I'm not in some isolated broadcast studio. I'm existing in some on the marginalia of life, but within life nonetheless. So anyway, we wanted to come back again this week, finish what we started, and I guess there's a lot more to cover. A lot more has happened in the last 48 hours. I think one of the biggest developments, Aaron, is a new ICJ ruling. I don't know if you want to brief us on that.
Yeah, well, let's hear it. This is the ICJ in response to the South African case ordering Israel to halt its assault on Rafah.
The court considered that in conformity with the obligations under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
So there's the ruling. And what does Israel do in response to this order from the ICJ to halt the operation, the assault on Rafah? It escalates it. As we're speaking, it's engaged in outright carpet bombing of Rafah.
Yeah, well, there are several things we'll break down around about what's happening around Rafah politically and militarily. This is one of the attacks that's happened in the last. And the Kuwaiti hospital, which is one of the few main functioning hospitals in the center of Rafah, which I've visited, is filling up. It's just completely overflowing with casualties. Now, if we look at the destruction of Rafah, it's important to kind of understand why this is significant. Basically, this is a GIF showing the destruction of Rafah, where basically the Biden administration said that it had a red line here, especially to the west of Rafah, where most of the refugees had fled from the north of Gaza. Since the start of Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip, something like 39% of the buildings in and around Rafah have been destroyed. And the Biden administration, as we now know, has kind of agreed to roll back its red line. One of the reasons they're doing so is they claim that something like 600,000 people have gone back to the northern areas, back to cities like Deir al-Balah or Khan Yunis, where Israel has momentarily withdrawn its forces. They always say, we destroyed Hamas's battalions there, we're withdrawing, and then they show up a few weeks or months later because they didn't actually finish the job, and Hamas reconstitutes because they're militarily failing. Israel is. But now we can see that they're moving more deeply into Rafah, destroying the city after guaranteeing and getting that guarantee accepted by the Biden administration that they were going to just do a quote unquote light operation, a targeted, more precise operation than what we saw in the north, where they simply destroyed everything. And where are they advancing from? They're advancing from the Philadelphia corridor, which is to the south of Rafah. Israel's claiming there are too many tunnels still active, allowing Hamas to be resupplied. And so they've occupied that area and they're moving north. And this is, in complete contravention of what they told the Biden administration. They completely lied, and the Biden administration is just providing cover for them by feeding the press this lie that it's just a precise targeted operation. It's not happening at all. So they're doing, and then they're flouting the ICJ decision today.
Let's remember what Joe Biden said. Just a few weeks ago, he told CNN that he would not support Israel going into Rafah and that he would cut off weapons to Israel if they did. And this got a lot of attention. This was him for the first time supposedly exerting U.S. leverage.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not.
So there it is. And now a few weeks later, this is Jake Sullivan completely contradicting what Biden said and basically sounding totally incoherent in explaining what the U.S. policy is. He basically says there is no U.S. policy.
Said yesterday that Israel has addressed many of the U.S. concerns regarding its operation in Rafah. 900,000 plus civilians have fled Rafah in recent weeks. Has Israel addressed all of the administration's concerns? Does the U.S. support what Israel is doing in Rafah right now?
We had detailed discussions on Rafah during my visit to Israel. These have built on weeks now, as I've discussed with you from this podium, of discussions on a professional basis about Rafah and about how Israel can achieve the defeat of Hamas everywhere in Gaza, including in Rafah, while minimizing civilian harm. I explained to the prime minister and other senior Israeli officials the president's clear position. I reiterated that position. I was briefed by Israeli officials and by Israeli professionals on refinements that Israel's made to its plans to achieve its military objectives while taking civilian harm. What we have seen so far in terms of Israel's military operations in that area has been more targeted and limited, has not involved major military operations into the heart of dense urban areas. We now have to see what unfolds from here. We will watch that. We will consider that, and we will see whether what Israel has briefed us and what they have laid out continues or something else happens. And one of you asked me the last time I was standing at this podium, how are you going to judge this? And I said that there's no mathematical formula. What we're going to be looking at is whether there is a lot of death and destruction from this operation or if it is more precise and proportional. And we will see that unfold. And we will obviously remain closely engaged with the Israeli government as we go. That's how we see the situation right now.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, we played that clip last week, but it's something you have to watch again and again to really understand the depths of depravity and idiocy of this administration, and specifically the callow and inexperienced national security chief, Jake Sullivan, the best and the brightest of Yale University. He's going to monitor Israeli human compliance with human rights and the quote unquote laws of war by how much death and destruction they cause after they do it, and then retroactively apply what leverage. Yeah. We're going to let you go in, see how many you kill, how much you destroy, and then we'll make our judgment, because we don't have data. We don't have like the benefit of having witnessed what Israel just did over the past 231 days to know what they're going to do there. We don't know what their doctrine is. We don't know how they fight. We just give them these weapons, and then we tell all our lawyers to certify more arms shipments, like $200 million in munition, in tank munitions. Sorry, $700 million in tank munitions alone, which the Biden administration just authorized to Israel. We actually confronted, our correspondent Liam Cosgrove confronted the Pentagon about this gigantic lie that the Biden administration has set some kind of red line around Rafah, or that it actually was pausing any munitions at all. And this wasn't just some performative sop to the base to try to hold off the revolt of the progressives and the youth against Biden ahead of his reelection campaign. Here's Liam Cosgrove at the Pentagon, and he gets a very testy response from Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh. I'm going to speed this up a little bit.
Right. Yeah, over here.
Thanks, Sabrina. So last week to CNN, President Biden said that he made it clear that if the Israeli government goes into Rafah, I will not be supplying weapons that have been used historically to deal with cities. Of course, we've seen the Israelis use tanks in urban centers throughout this war. And in the latest arms package, which is now on its way, expected to be approved, and was after Biden issued that statement, is $700 million in tank ammunition. So this statement appears to be false. Is it the Pentagon's assessment that tanks will not be used in the invasion of Rafah?
I think you're significantly oversimplifying things. So what I would tell you to do is to do a little homework on the package that was approved, and that this is long-term sales that will be going to Israel, and the State Department would have more for you on that. In terms of operating within an urban area, the Secretary, the President have been very clear that these type of high payload bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs, it's not necessary to be used in an urban area like Rafah. We are still, and I want to be very clear, we are still providing Israel the means to defend itself against its fight against Hamas. And you are still seeing shipments of weapon systems going to Israel, and will continue to go through. That is a commitment this president has made. But when it comes to that one shipment is paused.
Okay, but in the shipment that is not paused is $700 million in tank munitions. And are you saying that I can read the Biden quote again? I just read it to you.
You don't have to.
Okay, but he said.
Make it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem.
We're not going to supply weapons that have been historically used in cities. Are you saying tanks haven't been used in cities in Gaza?
I would direct you to the State Department for more on the sales. That has to do with sales to Israel. I just don't have that in front of me.
Okay, so we are providing.
I'm going to move on to the next question.
Okay.
And she punts really nasty. She punts to the State Department because they do the arms licensing. But Biden just ate his own words. Tanks are what they've mainly been using. Tanks were used in Khan Yunis to blow the head off of a 14-year-old girl named Dunya Abu Mohsen after she lost her entire family, lost her leg in an Israeli bombing, and blew her head off while she was laying in a hospital bed at Al Nasser Hospital. Those are the arms that the State Department is sponsoring, has licensed historically to Israel. And that's what the U.S. is doing again in Rafah. And Biden just ate his own words. I mean, he just came out and lied. And what did he get for that? He got the House GOP passing with bipartisan support a bill declaring that the U.S. cannot pause weapons to Israel. The United States cannot exercise sovereignty over, an administration cannot exercise sovereignty and independence on whom it chooses to sell weapons to or provide weapons to if it's Israel. I've never seen Congress do that with another country.
Oh, it's insane. And going back to
really what it was the other country was passing a law. Israel was passing a law on Congress, not on the U.S. not being able to send weapons to itself via its stooges in Congress.
And again, going back to what Jake Sullivan was saying there, he's acknowledging that we're going to facilitate what he calls death and destruction by saying we're only going to look at it after the fact as to whether or not it occurred. Well, that means you're allowing it to happen because you're supplying the weapons that cause it. It's such a crazy admission. And Biden put himself in this position because obviously he felt the need to say something after the campus protests. So he needed to pretend as if he was exerting leverage. But all it does in the end is make him look increasingly incoherent and weak because he lays out these so-called red lines that are they're just totally meaningless. They're just for show. And every time there's an opportunity to do actually something to hold Israel to account, he doesn't do it. He caves. And he ends up just giving Republicans their talking points to pretend as if he's not doing enough to arm Israel. And it's just it's completely incoherent. Completely incoherent.
There is no policy. Right days after Biden gave that interview, Tony Blinken went before the Senate and said it was just a discussion we had about pausing weapons. We're still looking at things. So then the right hand doesn't even know what the left hand is doing, and ultimately Israel is making the calls. we don't have time to show the footage, but Israel's not performing very well in Rafah. They claim that they're advancing, but they can advance wherever they want in the Gaza Strip. The strategy of the Al-Qassam brigades is not like the Ukrainian military where they're actually trying to like hold the front line. It's a guerrilla army. They just try to cause as much loss for the Israeli military as possible in the course of them advancing deep into Gaza. And Israel is losing soldiers almost every day. There are dozens and dozens of injuries taking place. I quoted, I cited a memo that was written by Yoram Hamo, who was the deputy advisor to Jake Sullivan's counterpart in Israel, Zaki Hanegbi, who is the national security advisor to Netanyahu, one of Netanyahu's closest confidants over the years. And here's what Yoram Hamo said about Israel's strategy, to the extent that it even has one, or Israel's plan in Gaza. He said that continuing the war in Gaza with its current approach will not achieve anything. Destroying Hamas is doubtful, in his words, and the issue of hostages will become a multi-year problem. And, Israel's been cutting deals on aid to get in medicine for the hostages specifically. They don't want medicine to get to non-Jews, but to the hostages, they've cut deals through Qatar to get them medicine. So that's what they're going to be doing for the next few years. Netanyahu has predicted the war could go on for 10 years. Israel's now in an endless war, and there's no progress. They've recovered some of the dead bodies of hostages in the north. They're not recovering hostages alive. They are not taking out major internationally known Hamas leadership. They are certainly not degrading Hamas after 230 days. U.S. intelligence has this giant overestimate. It's definitely an overestimate. 30% degradation of Hamas forces in Gaza, which is not what Israel promised the U.S. And the U.S. Biden administration is doing nothing to exercise leverage. Why? Because as Eli Clifton showed at Responsible Statecraft, over 1/3 of Biden's donors, his major donors who have donated close to $1 million to the Biden Victory Fund, have expressed pro-Israel views. They're basically acting on behalf of the state of Israel. So it's all about the Benjamins. And so we're seeing I guess what was the final red line dissipate into thin air with Jake Sullivan promising death and destruction. We'll just be monitoring. We'll just be counting skulls. And by the way, here's what Israel is getting up to all across the Gaza Strip. As Netanyahu declares that the ICC warrant is invalid because Israel is a democracy that represents democratic values, here's what Israeli forces are getting up to. They're burning books. They're literally burning books. This is at Aqsa University in Gaza City in the north, and it was posted by an Israeli soldier. This is, one of the more enduring images of the war, courtesy of journalist Yunus Tirawi, who monitors Israeli social media accounts, Israeli soldiers' social media accounts. So an Israeli soldier proudly posted this image. They're also in Rafah burning books at mosques. Here's an Israeli soldier. Burning a Quran and posting it. His name is Itzhak Buzna from the Rotem 435 Battalion of the Givati Brigade, one of Israel's major infantry units. He recorded himself burning a Quran inside a mosque in East Rafah just about 24 hours ago. And since he's been exposed, he locked his account, removed his profile photo. But this is what they're doing. This is what Israeli soldiers are doing all across Gaza, and they've been doing this throughout the whole war. According to Buzna's friend, in his unit, 1,000 books we burned in Gaza. I'm proud of you, my brother, said Roy Oz from the same unit as Itzhak, who burned the Quran. They're proudly claiming that they burned 1,000 Qurans. This is that post. So obviously this can all be submitted to the ICJ, to the ICC, and then the US will give them more flames to pour on the books. By the way, remember how many universities Israel has blown up in Gaza? Every single university has been blown up by the Israeli military. Every single one. Universities that even had no affiliation with Hamas. I believe this is Al-Azhar. You know, when I watch this, I think, how are the Jewish students at Columbia University and Harvard doing? That's what I think when I watch this. So there's nowhere to go to school in Gaza. Soldiers are running around burning thousands of books. They're burning Qurans. They've stolen books. There's actually Israel has historically stolen books and artifacts from the Palestinians. There's a great 2018 documentary called The Great Book Robbery about the thousands and thousands of books that Israel stole from Palestinian libraries during the Nakba in 1948. But in Gaza in 2021, one of the independent bookstores in Gaza City was targeted and bombed by Israeli forces during their assault that year on Gaza. And then they came back and destroyed virtually every school, bombed every university, and they're now burning books across Gaza with the full support of the supposedly democratic West. And when we talk about burning Qurans, what are they doing? I mean, this is an act that has caused enormous amounts of panic in countries like Sweden because of the fear of not just inflaming the Muslim population locally, and certainly it would inflame the Jewish population if Muslims went out and burned a Torah publicly. And I've never seen that happen in a Western society, but you have these Islamophobic provocateurs doing this in the West. They're worried about it in Sweden, endangering Swedish diplomats and NATO diplomats, because Sweden's part of NATO, abroad, or endangering Swedish, I don't know, Christian ministers who are working in the Middle East abroad. And so what Israel's doing, what Israeli soldiers are doing with the full encouragement of their commanders, is fueling a global religious war. And we, the taxpayers of the West, particularly the United States, we're just pouring gasoline on those flames. Obviously, it also conjures up images of Nazi Germany, of the Nazi book burnings. And we've seen Netanyahu and his president, Isaac Herzog, come out and claim that they found, Mein Kampf in some Palestinian's home, or, they found books in children's books, praising terrorism or praising Hitler. These are the ones who are setting the stage for these mass book burnings in Gaza. But we're the sponsors. As Heinrich Heine, the German anti-fascist intellectual, said, when you start burning books, you eventually burn people. But I don't know, maybe Israel did it the other way around, because they've been burning people for a long time.
And as Israel is literally burning books, what's the Biden administration doing? They're hosting forums on how to censor people online. This is from Deborah Lipsat, the so-called envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, honored to lead a symposium uniting tech innovators, government representatives, and global NGOs in the fight against online anti-Semitism. And what did this entail? She met with Google, Meta, Microsoft, TikTok, and Twitter, along with the American Jewish Committee, Anti-Defamation League, World Jewish Congress, the Center for Countering Digital Hate, among others. And they talked about basically combating anti-Semitism online, which is a euphemism for censoring people who criticize Israel's mass murder in Gaza. That's what the Biden administration is up to complement Israel's assault on every possible civilian institution in Gaza, including its education system.
It's just an assault on what makes people human. It's just an assault, an all-out assault on humanity. And Deborah Lipstadt, who cut her teeth as a Holocaust historian, is assisting Israel in reenacting the Holocaust. We couldn't be more clear about what's taking place there. Censoring speech, burning books, burning people, industrial slaughter of children, ethnic cleansing. They're running the whole gamut of crimes that were supposed to have been outlawed and condemned in the post-Nuremberg era. And it's so just ridiculously ironic that someone like Deborah Lipstadt would be so heavily involved in this repressive totalitarian fight. I can imagine David Irving, the Holocaust revisionist, who was her arch enemy, laughing from beyond the grave to see this. Hitler won. Hitler's winning right now in a way that we could have never imagined. That was actually the title of a book that I really recommend, by an Israeli former member of Knesset, who was actually at one point the speaker of the Knesset, Avram Berg. The book was supposed to be called Hitler Won. He had to change the title under pressure from his publisher to The Holocaust is Over, We Must Rise from its Ashes. Not quite as catchy. I think it cost him a lot of book sales, but it's a really good book on how Israelis have been so indoctrinated that they are actually primed for genocide. Avram Berg, despite having been the speaker of the Knesset, wound up blurbing my book, The 51-Day War on Israel's Assault on Gaza in 2014. And, he wears a kippah. He's still, active in Israeli life. But, you have these demons, Zionist demons like Deborah Lipstadt, who are actively censoring. She's sort of the front woman. She doesn't know how online media works. She's just a face. They're using her credibility as a Holocaust historian to censor independent media. And there is a lot of pressure right now from the US government through a small division in the Department of Homeland Security with an acronym I can't quite remember right now, to censor what they call pro-Hamas media. And that could really be anything. And when you think of censorship, it's not just censorship. They're also rolling out various attacks through their marionettes in mainstream media. They're planning to roll out lots of attacks. Mark my words. They work through these little cutouts like the National Contagion Research Institute, which was spun out of the Anti-Defamation League and is a cutout for Israeli and US intelligence. And they feed US media all of these attacks. They're rolling out attacks on the activist groups that are leading the street protests against Israel's genocide, on the student groups like Students for Justice in Palestine. And they're trying to connect them all to anything they can that might seem illegal, like Iran, Russia, China. And then what they're going to try to do is get foreign terrorist organization designations for domestic US dissident groups. That's the agenda right now at play. And so it's, the online media aspect, the censorship industrial complex is just one aspect of this. We'll see it progress through Congress, and we're going to see it progress through the media. And I can guarantee you, we at the Grayzone are in their crosshairs right now. We'll come back to that. So yeah, we were talking about Congress seeking foreign terrorist organization designations. I mean, we saw the House Governance Committee led by James Comer, and the House Governance and Oversight Committee led by James Comer and Virginia Fox call for the Treasury Department to investigate something like 12 groups from the just American anti-war groups for links to foreign terrorist organizations. That was a letter that they submitted to Treasury about 2 weeks ago. Those groups included If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. So they're targeting Jewish groups as well as groups led by Palestinians and groups just led by anti-war Americans. And who are they doing this for? Why are they targeting Americans in this way? Why are they trying to label so many Americans as terrorists? It's simply because they oppose the government that they cater to, which is the government of Israel. And here you can see Speaker Mike Johnson addressing a quote unquote Israeli Independence Day ceremony.
But tonight, we celebrate more than just 76 years of achievement. We celebrate the fulfillment of promises made millennia ago, promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, promises that survived Babylonian exile, Islamic caliphates, and the Nazi Holocaust. Through the hard work of men like Theodore Herzl, the Zionist dream has become a reality. And tonight, we gather as Christians and Jews and people of all faiths. We gather as those committed to belief that the Jewish people deserve to live safely in their ancestral and spiritual homeland. My friends, we are bound by the same.
Yeah, so there he is, Mike Johnson speaking at the Israeli embassy. I've never seen a House leader be that subservient to Israel, and the biblical.
Yeah, I thought that distinction belonged to Nancy Pelosi, who said that, you know, if what did she say, that if Israel, or if like, she said something similar to Biden, that if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it ourselves. We'll always be there for Israel.
I think Biden said that as well.
Yeah, no, but she, I know Biden said that, but anyway, she said something similar, or something about if Washington burned to the ground, we'd still be there for Israel. I don't know, but Mike Johnson is far exceeding any of that. He's just, and his whole thing is supposed to be America first, right? What happened to America?
That just becomes a marketing scam, just like everything else. America,
of course.
It's like,
yeah,
it's become one of those, like, you know, it's like those ads you see for, like, what was that chopping device that guy who like died of a terrible overdose death sold? It's like you could just chop anything, and he was just chopping stuff on a cutting board for $19.95. That's like America first. It's like something, you know, it's like when Homer Simpson would buy Ginsu knives. That's what's become of it since October 7th. Mike Johnson was a lawyer in Kentucky. He represented the Creation Museum, where you can go and actually tour what life was like thousands of years ago, where Adam basically rode on the back of a brontosaurus like Fred Flintstone. That's where Mike Johnson comes from. He's reading a script that was handed to him by the Zionist Organization of America and Sheldon Adelson's ghost. He's gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Israel lobby, and he'll just do whatever they want. It's pretty much what it comes down to. And we keep having these show trials in Congress. We're really getting close to, I thought, you know, Russiagate was McCarthyite in the extreme, but it's more on the nose now. When you see all of these campus presidents being dragged before committees, they're bringing educators, K through 12 educators, before the House GOP committees, and they're accusing them. If you pay close attention to the language, they're not accusing them of being anti-Israel anymore. They're not accusing them of being pro-Hamas, because they must have tested those phrases in some Frank Luntz focus group, and what they're accusing them of is being un-American. So now it's un-American to oppose Israel's genocide in Gaza, or to withhold aid to a foreign country called Israel. That's un-American. And that's where they're going. As I said before, they're going to start trying to apply foreign terrorist organization like sanctions and attacks on Americans for their opposition to Israel. And I mean, you have to watch these hearings to understand how cretinous and submental the House Republicans that are advancing this agenda are, and how easy, therefore, they are to puppeteer. And we thank Michael Tracy for doing that job, because, you know, we have a lot to do, and he's an institution.
In particular, on the delay of the sale of 6,500 JDAMs. I'm sure you're familiar with them. These are the high precision GPS oriented. You want the least amount of collateral damage in an urban area, you want a JDAM, and we have sent out tons of them to Israel and everywhere else. They also just happen to be made in the St. Louis metropolitan area, in St. Charles, in my district. And since I have not yet received a response to this letter, let me ask you why. Why has the administration failed to move forward with the notification process for the sale of 6,500 JDAMs to Israel? And when will the administration resume the notification process?
Congress right now is still reviewing a JDAM sale that we sent forward.
What specific issues remain outstanding for the review?
We follow the process, and we've gone out of our way to pre-notify Congress.
What bureaus object to the sale?
It's not a question of objecting. We want to follow the process.
Will you, sir, please, because it has truly been months and months and months. Will you commit to bringing your personal engagement to ensure the process for this specific case moves expeditiously?
We're going to make sure that all of the cases move.
Well, this one sure is not. And
this one.
Have any divisions within state conducted and any economic analysis to the measure the impact of potential even job losses and furloughs because of your decision to pause this pending arms sale? And if not, why not? Because you know what, sir? My constituents in St. Louis, greater metropolitan area, they were this whole region, they rely on these jobs to pay for their mortgages, their car payments, the daycare costs, and they can't afford to lose their jobs to support this partisan stall tactic. They're sitting in a warehouse, 6,500 of them.
There is no pause. And as I said, in many cases, including this one, we have previewed with Congress, which we're not at all obligated to do, sales that we were contemplating and had.
You have not come to us to tell us this. We read about this in Axios, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN. Arms sales to trusted partners like Israel, Taiwan, and NATO allies are a critical component of our national security.
They are.
Are you concerned that delaying sales to Israel will diminish our credibility as the arsenal of democracy?
Again, we're following the process, and I invite you to look.
Well, the process has taken too darn long, and they've been sitting there for months, and no one's explaining what's holding them up. But you all, they've been signed off on. I mean, the United States, sir, has obligations to our friends and allies, including Israel.
Yeah, I meant to play a different clip, but that's just as revealing. I mean,
you know, you had that guy, that candidate in New York, whose motto was the rent is too damn high. Well, for her, it's the process is taking too damn long in terms of selling JDAMs to Israel, and she links that to her constituents' well-being, that people can't pay their rent and buy groceries and provide daycare while we're pausing one shipment of weapons to murder people in Israel. It's like this is their version of America first. They somehow link the destruction of civilians in Gaza to the well-being of average U.S. citizens at home. And the main link there, if there is one, is that people's money that could be used towards bettering people here is being spent to murder people abroad. That's the actual connection, if there is one.
Yeah. People can't pay for their daycare because the JDAMs aren't being dropped on Gaza. And that's what it all comes down to. Military Keynesianism. We're the arsenal of democracy. JDAMs, those are 2,000-pound, 500-pound bombs designed to destroy targets that are buried deep underground. And they're being dropped on multifamily homes. And this really impacts the daycare quality of people in suburban white flight districts of St. Louis. We got to get those JDAMs over that. Really, I mean, and it's true. I mean, so much of the American economy thrives off of death. It's what I call the necro economy. You see it here in Washington, D.C., especially in the suburbs of Northern Virginia. But, you know, not far from me in Washington, D.C., there are gleaming offices for BAE Systems and General Dynamics and all other merchants of death. And next to those offices, in areas that, you know, when I was growing up were just like industrial wastelands, kind of blighted areas with some housing projects, you now have gleaming condos and, you know, kind of like ultra modern lofts for the mid-level workers in the necro economy. And they now tower over what's left of the projects. And the people living in the projects, Greenwood Terrace, for example, over in Southwest Washington, D.C., which is just surrounded by these drone lofts. They've gotten no improvement in their quality of life, none. So perfect example of the necro economy there. But back to, you know, the McCarthyism that we've been seeing out of Congress from the House GOP under the sway of Netanyahu. Here is Representative Tim Walberg targeting by name a professor of Middle East studies at the University of Michigan, Juan Cole.
In March, the advisory committee hosted University of Michigan professor Juan Cole to speak on Islamophobia and, quote, anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian biases. Fine. But Cole has made numerous anti-Semitic statements, including claiming that Israel, quote, was founded on a formal racial supremacist principle that Jews must rule the state. And that, quote, the only thing that Palestinians and their sympathizers can do to make Zionists happy is to bend over and allow themselves to be royally screwed. What kind of committee on anti-Semitism invites an anti-Semite like this to speak? And with that, sadly, I end my questioning. I yield back.
Where's the lie?
Yeah, where's the lie? I mean, Juan Cole is a very accomplished professor, and that's the norm now. They've also been smearing professors who've taken part in solidarity encampments elsewhere too, including at Northwestern. What happened at Columbia, where professors there also were thrown under the bus by their president. This is the new norm. This is and everyone's going along with it. And the media,
Joseph Mossad was called out by
Manu
Shafiq, the president, or she agreed that he was anti-Semitic. One of the only Palestinian professors at Columbia.
And finally, after weeks, for the first time, we're seeing the first arrests for the violence against anti-genocide protesters at UCLA, where they were attacked by hooligans, by Zionist hooligans with wooden batons and by fireworks, literally launching fireworks in the crowd. And finally, they just arrested somebody who was identified in a CNN report after the guy's mother admitted that he was there attacking the encampment, and then, of course, tried to walk that back once they realized that they were putting themselves in legal jeopardy. But so that guy's finally been arrested. But I believe that's the first arrest that's been made at UCLA weeks after that mob violence against these peaceful protesters who were just there setting up an encampment to protest genocide.
Yeah. This was an 18-year-old who was seen. I found a video of him. His mother's name is Sharon Onsiboni, and she owns a big catering company in Beverly Hills, California. And you know, they're Israeli American. As I've been pointing out, these are not run-of-the-mill hooligans. These aren't like, you know, Northern England football hooligans who come from working class communities. These are people from elite, affluent backgrounds who actually have the ability to influence local politics and national politics. Let's play the CNN clip on Idan On, who is the first hooligan arrested out of countless ones who committed assault and battery multiple times on camera, on live streams, on local LA news. The first arrest, and it came because he was exposed by CNN. I don't know why. I think that the political pressure just became too extreme to not make at least some token arrest.
Among them, this man. He strikes a pro-Palestine protester with a long white pole.
Everybody's striking them with poles.
He's part of a mob that pummels the man as he falls to the ground. Stop. He's seen in multiple videos wearing this white mask, striking the barriers, throwing objects into the encampment. Without his mask, we see who he is. 18-year-old Idan On of Beverly Hills, a senior at a local high school.
Come inside to the kitchen. How do I get inside?
I spoke with his mother.
Hi there. Are you Sharon? Hi.
Hi, Sharon. Your son is a
Hi.
thug.
Let me introduce us.
She did not want to be on camera, but quickly identified her son from this picture at UCLA that night. She described in detail how her son found the mask and pole on the ground and said he was defending himself in this fight. On her Facebook page, Idan On's mother posted and circled a screen grab of her son from a local TV station. She wrote in Hebrew, Idan went to bully the Palestinian students in the tents at UCLA. Idan's mother and father proudly support Israel and defend.
To bully the students and played the song that they play to the Nukba terrorists And what she means by that is that they were using sonic terrorism against people in the tent encampment. And in Israel, what they've been doing while they torture Palestinian men who they accuse of being Hamas quote unquote terrorists is they play this song Mani Mentara, which is a children's song. And if you listen to it over and over again, it starts to drive you crazy. And the singer who's behind that song, which has become extremely popular in Israel because it's become a torture song, has performed for Israeli soldiers on their way into Gaza, performing a children's song on their way to commit genocide. And so the mother is proud of her 18-year-old son for doing that.
Defended their son's actions at UCLA, saying he is heading to Israel to join the IDF after our.
And he's heading to Israel to join the army. So he's gotten $30,000 bail. He shouldn't get bail. He's a flight risk. He's going to Israel to join the army. Israel has a non-extradition treaty. The only person that they didn't allow in, the only Jewish criminal that Israel didn't allow in was Meyer Lansky that I can think of. The guy who ran the numbers for Lucky Luciano, Bugsy Siegel, and the rest of the mafia after he was kicked out of Cuba. When I was growing up in the DC area, there was a story, and I can't remember the name. I'm going to look it up. There was a young man who actually killed his friend in Rockville, Maryland, chopped him into pieces and put him in his car and like dumped him somewhere and then fled to Israel. And the Clinton administration had to fight tooth and nail to extradite this young man because Israel doesn't give these figures up. I'm gonna look it up just so you know I'm not,
Oh, I remember that. I remember that. And there was a campaign to sort of keep him in Israel. There are people who wanted to like protect him.
So why are they giving this kid bail? He's going to easily flee to Israel. This guy, Samuel Scheinbein. Yeah, this is amazing. Once I can the Israeli hold on. There's going to be some ads on this, but this is a Washington Post headline from 1999. Samuel Scheinbein can't be extradited. He's a citizen of Israel, its Supreme Court says. Israel's Supreme Court ruled yesterday that Samuel Scheinbein, charged with killing, dismembering, and burning another Montgomery County teenager in September 1997, is a citizen of Israel and cannot be extradited to the United States, even though he never lived in Israel, but whose family sent him there 3 days after Alfredo Enrique Teo Jr.'s mutilated and charred torso is found, remains in custody, and Israeli officials said he will be indicted there within days. It disappointed U.S. officials. Well, it was so disappointing. I think the U.S. then threatened to cut aid to Israel over that. Very rare moment where the U.S. threatened to cut aid. Anyway, long story there, but the point is, our justice system is being tampered with. It's been completely infected to the point where there's a fear about, it's obvious there's a fear about arresting these thugs. And it was only because CNN so clearly and embarrassingly exposed Idan On that he was arrested. But he'll be fine. The rest of these students, by the way, who've been arrested for protesting genocide, they're being subjected to re-education at New York University. They have to answer 30 questions or so at NYU explaining why they were wrong. I've seen the questionnaires. It's like something you have to do in second grade or in a totalitarian society. They're not allowed to defend their actions. Other students just simply won't graduate, and they've had to go have alternative graduation ceremonies, all for just protesting genocide. Anyway, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, but it continues to amaze me that there's only been one arrest out of UCLA.
Just one. When you have so much footage, You had finally UCLA firing its police chief again after many weeks, where because the police left these students to be assaulted. It's like in front of everybody. It was broadcast live on TV, and there was no protection for them. Even as it was happening, everyone knew it was happening. There was no effort to go and protect them. It took hours for police to arrive. It was a deliberate effort to let this violence, this mob violence, happen against peaceful protesters. I went to that encampment. These are a bunch of students. They had a food station. It was totally peaceful, just in a little part of campus, and the authorities there let them be attacked. And only now we're just seeing for the first time an arrest. And yeah, I agree. I don't think it would happen if not for that CNN report.
Yeah, there's no hearings on. There's no investigation into the LAPD, UCPD, LA Sheriff's Department standing down for 4 hours that I've seen out of LA. But then again, LA is what gave us ramparts and has had so many federal consent decrees on their cops. They're pretty corrupt.
No investigation into who funded these hooligans, including Jessica Seinfeld, the wife of Jerry Seinfeld, who proudly gave $5,000 to the groups that were harassing these students. All this fear mongering about who's funding these students, when really they're just there's nothing to fund. They're setting up their own tents and they're out there protesting. When meanwhile you have violent mobs being funded out in the open, and of course there's no scrutiny of that whatsoever.
Yeah. And since we're going down the rabbit hole, James Bamford has a great piece in The Nation, one of the rare moments when I read The Nation these days, on the Israel-American Council, which was launched by Sheldon Adelson over 10 years ago and was heavily involved in the counter demonstration to the UCLA encampments and created the architecture, the logistical basis for carrying out that mob attack. And yes, it's mostly centered within the Republican Party, the IAC, and it's there to supplement the power of AIPAC. But they also have had on their board, and he's still listed as a team member, one of the top, if not the top individual donor to Biden, who's donated at least $1 million to Biden's victory fund, Haim Saban, who's right there in Beverly Hills in a mansion with leather ceilings, who is an Israeli American. And so this is bipartisan. Bill Ackman was also involved in funding those counter demonstrations in LA. They're not facing any scrutiny. You know who's facing scrutiny? The campus presidents who negotiated with the students, who attempted to give the students some of their demands rather than sending police from off campus onto campus to brutalize their own students. And now those campus administrators have been called before Congress for McCarthyite show trials by the House GOP to just simply be screamed at by Elise Stefanik, who was just in Israel. Elise Stefanik was just in Israel to campaign for Trump's VP slot, speaking before the Israeli Knesset, before her true colleagues and constituents. So that's American politics. And the Trump VP stakes are just deeply pathetic and revelatory of what America First is really becoming, because everyone who's campaigning for VP, who's supposedly in the running for VP, now we're being told Tom Cotton is a top contender. Every single one of them is a neocon tool, down to Tim Scott, whose sole donor for his vanity run for the Republican nomination is Larry Ellison, who said that one of the reasons he supports Tim Scott is Tim Scott's strong support for Israel. Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, which is an intelligence and military contractor. He owns a private island in Hawaii.
I mean, the only one, the only person who you could maybe say is not a neocon tool in the Trump VP contest is JD Vance, because he's been critical of U.S. policy in Ukraine. But what's JD Vance saying about Israel? Well, he's totally it's a parody. Michael Tracy just pointed this out. JD Vance just said a big part of the reason why Americans care about Israel is because we're still the largest Christian majority country in the world, which means a majority of citizens of this country think that their savior, and I count myself Christian, was born, died, and resurrected in that narrow little strip of territory off the Mediterranean. The idea that there's ever going to be an American foreign policy that doesn't care a lot about that slice of the world is preposterous because of who Americans are. So that's J.D. Vance, who's not technically considered to be part of the neocon camp, professing his fidelity to Israel because the U.S., he says, is a Christian country. It's just,
JD was at the JD Vance was at the Quincy Institute conference yesterday in the Senate, and he aligns with the Quincy Institute on Ukraine. He aligns with libertarians there, but on Israel, he's just cynically playing up his ultra Zionist bona fides to be Trump's VP. It couldn't be more obvious. And that's pretty sad. I mean, I think JD Vance is the only possible VP pick that could still maintain friction between Trump and the deep state and not act as a little termite in the Trump administration on behalf of the three-letter agencies. But there he is on Israel. Great. So great choices coming up this November to choose from. Anyway, we should pivot to Ukraine. We had some amazing displays of democracy in the British Parliament this week. There's Boris Johnson with the color coordinated Azov flag, coordinated with his suit and hair, and members of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion in Congress. And we've been hearing so much about anti-Semitism, but I haven't seen any major pro-Israel or Jewish group condemn this display of reverence for Nazism, for a battalion that was founded by Andrei Beletsky, who declared that its mission was to lead the white world in a crusade against the Untermenschen. That's Andrei Beletsky, who was honored and with a Medal of Honor by Volodymyr Zelensky only a few months ago. What was Boris Johnson doing here, Aaron? I mean, what was the point of this?
Well, he's campaigning for increased military assistance to Ukraine, because now Ukraine's big thing is they want U.S. permission and U.S. help to strike targets across the border. And so Boris Johnson is welcoming the Azov battalion to, sing their praises and to endorse Zelensky's call. And Kit Clarenberg and Alex Rubinstein, who have a new YouTube channel called Active Measures, they just published video of Boris Johnson hosting Azov, and in that video, he sings their praises.
My message to you is very simple. Thank you to the heroes, the Azov Brigade, who warned us about their presence tonight. Give the Ukrainians what they need. Give them the weapons. Give them the authorization to use those weapons outside their own borders. It's now absolutely ludicrous that Ukrainians should be forbidden from doing what Putin is doing himself and attacking Ukrainian forces. Why on earth shouldn't Ukrainians be able to attack Russian forces mustering on their borders? Give them those weapons, give them the attackers, give them the budget, give them the air defenses that they need. It's the single best investment that we can make in the defense of the whole Euro-Atlantic area, is supporting Ukrainian heroes. We rely wholly on heroes such as the people who are here tonight with us from the Azov Brigade.
I mean, recall that the U.S. Congress banned assistance to the Azov battalion because they are neo-Nazi. This was a law passed after many attempts by Congressmember John Conyers, late John Conyers. It finally passed a few years ago. It still, I believe, is on the books. I don't think it's been rescinded, but everyone just ignores it, and everyone just ignores that we used to openly call them what they are, which is neo-Nazi. And now that's all forgotten, and Boris Johnson can go and call them heroes and lobby for them to receive direct U.S. assistance to strike across the border into Russia. And to answer his question, why shouldn't Ukraine be given our help to strike across the border into Russia? Well, first of all, I mean, why should we be belligerents in a war against a nuclear armed power? How is that in the interest of anyone's security? And for Ukraine, putting aside the fact that, all the background of the coup in 2014 and the undermining of the Minsk peace process, all that stuff, just practically for Ukraine, how does this help Ukraine to escalate with an adversary that at every stage, whenever Ukraine escalates, Russia retaliates far more ferociously because it has far more power? That's just the reality that of this war, which was recognized once by Barack Obama and Antony Blinken. Back when Obama was the president, Blinken said that if you're trying to engage militarily with Russia, you're playing to Russia's strength. So put aside the morality and all the facts, like the political context, all this, just tangibly, militarily, you're only encouraging the decimation of Ukraine. We've seen that at every single turn. After Ukraine hit the Kerch Bridge in the fall of 2022, Russian attacks massively escalated for the first time, going after infrastructure that they hadn't hit before. So what you're doing, if you're Boris Johnson, is you're basically asking for Ukraine to face further destruction. On top of the fact that you're ignoring all the multiple opportunities to, rather than engaging in further wars, to actually negotiate, which Boris Johnson has sabotaged in the past. And that's an alternative to all this escalation, is actually attempting diplomacy, which Boris Johnson has opposed and undermined at every turn.
Yeah. And there were denials that Boris Johnson flew to Ukraine to push them in April 2022 to not negotiate with Russia. Tens and tens of thousands of deaths ago. And now we've seen Ukrainian negotiators come out and admit that that's precisely what took place. We've seen the Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, Foreign Affairs confirm that that took place. Everybody knows that Boris Johnson was the guy who went in to promise Zelensky not only fame and to stroke his vanity, but to promise massive amounts of weapons, armaments, and Western support and victory. A victory that's been obviously elusive, as we clearly predicted. Now, Boris Johnson, let's just approach it from a different point of view. Let's approach it from a sort of America first point of view. Sure, okay, Ukraine, you can go strike Russia as far as you want, but not with our help. Why should we, Americans or British people, have to support Ukraine waging war against a nuclear power? Why? How does that protect security throughout Western Europe, as he claimed? It doesn't. It's also clearly deeply damaged the British economy. There was an interview by one of Boris Johnson's closest aides, his basically outsourced political brain, Dominic Cummings, that appeared 2 weeks ago. I could pull it up in a second. And basically what Cummings said is that these sanctions that we enacted, along with the Americans on Russia, have boomeranged on us, screwed us, and we're supporting a corrupt mafia state, in his words, in Ukraine, and we don't know where any of the money is going. So I think Johnson might have been responding to that interview by Cummings, which hasn't really been reported in any Western media, although it seems kind of like these were bombshell comments by someone who's still very active in British politics. And then there's the fact that footage, which we saw the full footage thanks to Active Measures, Alex Rubinstein and Kit Klarenberg, Ukrainian state media had disseminated some of the footage before, but they left out the part at the end where Boris Johnson called the Azov battalion heroes.
Really?
For obvious reasons. Yeah.
That's so funny. On your point about how is this in the interest of anyone's security? I mean, look at what is being hit right now by Ukraine inside of Russia. One of the sites that just got hit was a early warning radar, which detects incoming attacks, including nuclear strikes. So this is basically an attack on infrastructure that helps protect the world from World War III, from nuclear war. And this is the kind of stuff that can happen when you're fueling a conflict against the world's other top nuclear armed power. I mean, do we really want to be providing weaponry and intelligence and assistance for attacking radar sites that like detect incoming attacks and that can help Russia figure out whether or not it's being hit with nuclear weapons? And we know from the past there have been many, many close calls where, because Soviet forces misinterpreted a U.S. Operation or a U.S. A ship movement, they thought for a second that they were being attacked with nuclear weapons, and luckily somebody intervened to prevent that. But this is the infrastructure we need to keep the peace, and it's being decimated or undermined because of this proxy war.
Yeah, and I see a few people in the chat weren't aware of the Dominic Cummings comments and didn't believe me. Here they are. This whole Ukrainian corrupt mafia state has basically conned us all, and we're all going to get effed as a consequence. We should have never gotten into the whole stupid situation, Cummings said. This is not a replay of 1940 with Potemkin Zelensky as the Churchillian underdog. Cost of living has been a massive shock. The sanctions regime has been much more of a disaster for European politics than it has been for Russian politics. They, the advocates of backing Ukraine, said, oh, China will support us. I said then, no, China will not. China is going to make loads of money by supplying Russia. The results have been getting into a war of attrition with Russia, who we pushed into an alliance with the world's biggest manufacturing power. And yeah, Russia is supplying their own weaponry. They have their own domestic military production that is outpacing the US and Western Europe in supplying Ukraine. And it's their war. If it's Ukraine's war, why do we have to support them? And what are we supporting anyway? We're not supporting Ukraine. We're supporting a tiny fraction or maybe a plurality of the Ukrainian population and the Ukrainian electorate that has nationalist, Galician-oriented views that are hostile to the entire Eastern population of their country, or what was their country. So we're not supporting Ukraine. We're supporting a nationalist movement within Ukraine that has malign intentions.
Yeah, a big reason why we have this war is because that tendency, the ultranationalist tendency inside Ukraine you're talking about, didn't want to implement a peace deal, the Minsk peace deal, which would have reincorporated the parts of Eastern Ukraine that rebelled against the coup government, because they didn't want to grant them equal rights. They did not see them as equal Ukrainians. And so therefore, because they refused to implement the Minsk Accords, that's a major reason why we have this whole thing to begin with. So we're fighting this insane and dangerous proxy war on behalf of fascists, basically. That's what it comes down to. And we've used them because the U.S., not that the U.S. has strong views about Ukrainian nationalism, but the U.S. sees Ukraine as a tool to weaken Russia. So there's been a convergence of interest there. And how is Antony Blinken handling all this? Well, he recently went to Kyiv, and now he's come back, and he's urging, according to the New York Times, he's urging Biden to lift restrictions on how Ukraine can use American arms. So the top diplomat, supposedly, of the U.S., that's his job, is to be a diplomat, is now acting as chief warmonger in asking Biden to deepen himself even more in this war. And at every stage when we've seen the U.S. say we're not going to do something in Ukraine, that means they're eventually going to do it. We saw that with the ATACMS. Jake Sullivan once said that Biden wouldn't do that because that's a road to world war. Well, we all know how that turned out. Now ATACMS are being used, including just recently in Crimea. And if I were making bets, I would bet that Blinken will get his way, because every time there's a aversion to an escalatory policy, eventually, because we refuse to negotiate with Russia, the battlefield situation of Russia's advances forces Ukraine to get even more desperate, and the Biden administration goes along.
There's a letter being circulated in the Senate. It's addressed to the White House, I believe, calling for exactly what Blinken's lobbying for, sending the ATACMS to strike deeper into Russia. This is a sign of desperation. The Ukrainian military is in a terrible shape right now, and Russia can always escalate past the point where Ukraine can. I mean, remember, after the striking of the Kerch Bridge, that's when Russia began to strike electrical facilities, the electrical infrastructure inside Ukraine. And they'll continue doing it. So all the US is doing is pushing Russia further up the escalatory ladder, and they can climb much higher than the Ukrainian military can, especially when, if you look at what's happening just with Ukrainian society, there isn't any military left. This is Reuters from April. Ukraine launches military charm offensive as conscription flags. They're not really telling you what this article is actually about. Sorry, I just try to get rid of an ad there. But if you scroll down deep into the article, you can read that Kiev is desperate to replenish its drained and depleted forces, which are vastly outnumbered and outgunned by Russia along a 1,000-kilometer front as the war enters a third grinding year. Blah, blah, blah. There's a poll by Sapiens this February, which is a Kiev-based research agency. In the survey of 400 Army-eligible men, only 35% said they were prepared to serve if called up. And this complements reporting that we're seeing about the complete lack of reserve forces to reinforce Ukrainian military lines, which are collapsing as we speak. And you can see the footage all over social media of young men and even older men fighting packs of military police, dragging them into vans to take them to the front lines, where they're just going to be basically used as bullet stoppers for Tony Blinken.
Yeah. And that's why throughout Europe, Ukraine stopped providing consular services to people of military age because it wants to encourage them to go back and fight. There was talk about getting European countries to like deport people back to Ukraine, back to a war zone, which I don't think will happen. But that's how desperate things have gotten that discussion was even on the table, forcing Ukrainians to go back to their country and die. That's where we're at. And when it comes to supporting Ukraine, is setting more people off to their death. And this is what's called supporting Ukraine in the West. If you question all this, then somehow you're siding with Russia and you're not on the side of Ukraine, because if you don't want to see Ukraine's continued destruction and the sacrificing of generations of its people.
And speaking of Tony Blinken, he really did not see this coming. Ukraine's Kuleba, that's the foreign minister, Tony Blinken's counterpart, Dmitry Kuleba, took him out for a cozy dinner to a popular pizza place during Blinken's recent visit to Kiev. What Western media isn't telling you, according to Che Bose, is that it's decorated with Nazi symbols and pictures from the Odessa Trade Union's House massacre, where Ukrainian Nazis burned civilians alive in 2014. Most of our audience will be familiar with that incident. Basically took place when opponents of the 2014 Maidan coup set up tents to protest against the takeover of a nationalist government. This was in Odessa, where there's a large percentage of ethnic Russians, Russian speakers living. And Ukraine's SBU, CIA-trained intelligence services helped organize neo-Nazi bandits to attack those tents, to attack those protesters. They chased them to a trade union hall where they took shelter, and then they burned the hall, and people were burned alive or died jumping out of windows to try to save themselves. And here's Tony Blinken with Kuleba at this cafe that celebrates that massacre. This is someone, Tony Blinken, who's an American Jew. He's an American Jew dining at a Nazi cafe.
Whose stepfather was a Holocaust survivor.
Whose stepfather, thank you for pointing that out. Samuel Pisar was a Holocaust survivor who always thanked the Red Army for liberating him from a Nazi death camp. And Tony Blinken will never, ever say that the Soviet Red Army saved the man who raised him. I mean, this is, yeah. And I'm familiar with this cafe because at the Grayzone, we reported, Alex Rubinstein did a series of reports on American criminals, homicidal American criminals and white nationalists who fled the US to Ukraine. And several of them have taken photos in front of this wall, which is at that neo-Nazi oriented cafe. That just occurred to me. Here you can see a Nazi patch right below that rifle. So it's just a humiliation of Tony Blinken to have to sit in a Nazi cafe in order to support the rule, to show support and continue the quote unquote rules-based order. I mean, just, it's so sickening. And he always says his family comes from Ukraine, and that explains his support for Ukraine. My family comes from Ukraine. The reason that my family exists is because they fled Ukraine 2 years before Simon Petlura ethnically cleansed the Jewish population from Justingrad, which is where they're from, south of Kiev. And today in Kiev, there are streets named for Petlura, one of the godfathers of Ukrainian Banderite nationalism. What family is Tony Blinken talking about? I don't think they're family that would be particularly happy with him sitting in that cafe. He's selling it. He's selling out his own heritage for NATO and empire. And we will never hear again, we'll never hear the ADL condemn Boris Johnson, or BICOM, whatever, the British component, condemn Boris Johnson for calling Nazis heroes in the British Parliament.
Yeah, never. And meanwhile, Biden, Blinken, they all talk about anti-Semitism, a crisis going on inside the U.S. because people are protesting mass murder by Israel in Gaza. At every chance they get, they cry anti-Semitism while, visiting neo-Nazi themed restaurants inside Kiev. The hypocrisy is stunning, and it's worth thinking about for people who claim that there's inconsistency between the Biden administration's policies in Ukraine and Gaza. Like, some people on the left will say, well, how can we not support Palestinians when we're supporting Ukrainians and standing up to Russian aggression? Well, actually, in the case of both countries, Ukraine and Israel, we're on the side of the ethno-supremacists who reject the equality of other people in their land. In Ukraine, that's the ultranationalists who don't see ethnic Russians of Ukraine as equal. In Israel, it's the Zionists who want to wipe out the indigenous population. So there is continuity there. And that's why Zelensky, at every chance he gets, tries to profess his fidelity to Israel, because he sees it with justification as part of the same struggle.
It's just so essential to American empire at this point, post-Iraq War American nationalism, that is reluctant to wage war directly with conventional armies against their adversaries, their designated enemies, Russia, China, Iran, is that they outsource it to fascistic nationalist movements that control states, specifically Israel and Ukraine, but also Taiwan, especially under the control of the DPP. And who's doing it? Liberal administrations whose constituents have Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns and wave rainbow flags. Michael Parenti called it rational fascism in his book, Black Shirts and Reds. I call it liberal fascism. We preach liberalism at home, we preach democracy, and outsource our violence through hybrid warfare, dirty wars and proxy wars, to fascistic forces that literally burn books in open air death camps like Gaza, to neo-Nazis who burn protesters in trade union halls in Odessa, shell people in Donbass. That's kind of those are the contours of American empire right now. And, we just keep them over there, and it's good for us. It's profitable, because if we sell those 6,000 JDAMs to Israel, then people will be able to pay for daycare in the White Flight District in St. Louis. It's good for the arsenal of democracy, as Biden said. Military aid to Ukraine is creating jobs in Western Pennsylvania for his constituents over in Scranton. We've got to arm the heroes in the Azov battalion. It's something we're not supposed to talk about. We're not supposed to look at it as one system, but it's all connected. And the people that are the most supportive of the entire package of military aid to these fascistic, nationalistic movements tend to be in blue districts. Remember, the only members of Congress that voted in the $95 billion supplemental to Israel and Ukraine against both aid to Israel and Ukraine were in deep red districts. And these were MAGA members of Congress, including Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are not exactly anti-Zionists. It's the people in like Fairfax County in Virginia, one of the most liberal counties in America, that votes 96% for Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. They're the ones that support the full $95 billion because the money's all coming back there and to the contractors. Anything else we want to cover? I mean, what's happening in Haiti is really insane. But we should probably, cover that next week. There was a state dinner for Kenya's president in which not only Biden attended, but Barack Obama made a surprise appearance. And it's so obviously a reward for Kenya sending troops to Haiti. So Obama helping to destroy another country from, as post-president. But we should definitely cover that next week.
And of course, Julian Assange recently got another, I don't know, we can call it a lifeline because it's just prolonging his torture, but he has now another appeal he can make to the British High Court. But basically, you can see what's going on there. They're just trying to keep him locked up for as long as possible. I feel like this will be the never-ending game. Keep granting him appeals that keep hope alive, but also keep him caged at Belmarsh.
Well, I know that the US DOJ, Merrick Garland, sent people to the UK to actually issue threats and create, send kind of an atmosphere of fear and acrimony so that to warn against giving Assange an appeal. So it's definitely a huge victory for everyone who believes in not just freeing Julian Assange, but who believes in a free press. I don't want to make any judgments beyond the fact that at least this gives Julian Assange and his family and his advocates the ability to fight on.
Yeah. Obviously, anything is better than him being extradited. But I just fear that it's part of a strategy to keep him caged, as they've done so far. But of course, there's always hope. There's always hope. Obviously, we'll do as much as we can on that.
And I guess I meant to comment last week or during our last stream earlier this week on the death of Ibrahim Raisi. We just haven't been learning enough about the circumstances of the helicopter crash for me to make any judgment, but I think there is cause for suspicion. 2 other helicopters landed safely. Okay, on the one hand, Raisi was often putting himself in danger. He was very much trying to be a man of the people, visiting provinces, visiting villages all the time with very little security. His helicopter was not like a presidential helicopter, like the kind that, Joe Biden or Kamala Harris fly over my house in. It was an old Bell helicopter, an American helicopter, like 40 years old. It's completely possible that it just went down in inclement weather on a trip that was important politically for Raisi, inaugurating a dam with Azerbaijan, but was probably ill-advised in that kind of weather. At the same time, Raisi would be a top target for Israel. It fits Israel's pattern. The killing of Soleimani took place because Israel didn't believe it could get Trump to authorize U.S. military action against Iran. It thought they had Trump in their back pocket, and so they wanted to escalate further. And here you had the Biden administration refusing to respond or telling Israel that it could not respond, but that the U.S. wouldn't respond to Iran's counterattack after Israel attacked the Iranian consulate in Syria. Something that I was wondering what Israel is going to do. What insane thing is Israel going to do to try to drag the U.S. deeper into its conflict with Iran? So it fits their MO, and you have Israeli military bases in Azerbaijan with weapons and capabilities that the Azerbaijan government isn't even aware of. Iran has furiously protested those bases with President Aliyev of Azerbaijan. And then he at one point went to his defense minister and said, what's going on at these bases? And the defense minister didn't even have clear answers for the Iranians. So I think we need to keep an eye on this. And there is an Iranian investigation that's ongoing, but we haven't been able to get enough details to really say more than I'm saying. But for Raisa to be traveling under those circumstances, it's just sort of it's just unusual to me, given the amount of security threats that Iran faces. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I haven't followed it at all, so I have nothing to say about it, unfortunately. But yeah, I agree. We need to learn more, and I'm sure we will.
If we do anything more on it, we'll bring on an actual Iranian expert.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it as always. The links to support the Grayzone are there on your screen, and also please like the stream. Also, please like the stream and share it. And Max, anything to plug coming up in the Grayzone?
More attacks coming on the Grayzone, which will be fun, and more good reporting, which is the reason why we got a target on our back.
Sounds like a very typical week. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Another typical week at the Grayzone, where maybe we'll become the story. Who knows? But yeah, this was another great chat. We had a ton of people joining us last minute, so we're really grateful. And pick up the new book by Anya Parampil, Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire, at Or Books or wherever else you can get it. And we'll be back next week. Peace.
Peace.